Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. So in this week's case, we deal with a very peculiar murder which involves basically someone's, well, not just one, but two people's bodies were put into the whole thing. They cremate bodies in at a crematorium. I kind of should have phrased it like that, but nevertheless, and it looks like they were murdered. It wasn't just like, oh, it's an accident. It's like someone purposely put them in there and killed them while they were still alive. And what this whole case has to do with a guy that Sherlock's somewhat familiar with. He's a PI named Fred. Just call him Fred. I literally blinked on his last name just now, but it's not kind of the point. Obviously, like, the fact of the matter is, like, he was investigating something, because this is all connected to a case from, like, 30 years ago. It's, like, some courthouse shooting that happened, and basically, he went off and talked to a lot of the people that were connected to the case, like the family members of some of the victims and stuff like that. And so, obviously, like, there's a whole situation there where it seemed like, oh, obviously, he was trying to get access to some of their kind of sell some of the victim stuff. So it'd be like, oh, like, this is memorabilia connected to a big time murder case or something like that, you know? Which then it turns out, like, the way Sherlock was like, oh, he was kind of recreating things. He's getting blood samples and stuff like that. And so he was like, at first I was like, wait a minute. Oh, so you're saying, like, before Sherlock really explained that, so, oh, you're saying he's recreating? Because it's like, there's a lot more complexity to this case. That things like, because apparently the shooter in this case ended up killing himself. So it's like, it was kind of an open and shut case. But the fact of the matter is, I was like, oh, are you trying to say, like, he thought there was a lot more to this, that the case was a lot more complex than it thought? But then he adds a different layer of complexity to it. It's like taking my idea and completely throwing it in the trash when he ends up bringing up, like, Chernobyl. That he was saying that basically there was always a thought that basically what went down in Chernobyl ended up being something committed by America, that basically they sent they had four people commit the crime and then basically gave them I don't know what's the word. The best word I can think of is sanctuary. There's another word for it, and I just can't think of it. But basically gave them new identities and hid them here in the States. And that for the people that were the victims were actually the people that committed the crime. So this might be what that's all about. But then it turns on its head even more when you find out, like, no, the reason why Fred was looking into it, because basically this boy, his name is Carter, he was the son of the guy who did the shooting at the courthouse. Carter ended up finding out that he's not that dude's son, because Carter has, like, a disease called CMT. That's just the initials of it. It's basically like a nuclear disease that basically it's like a deterioration, like, basically it attacks your like, it attacks you on the limbs level. Basically it's a genetic disease, but the fact is his grandfather, the person he believed was his grandfather, the father of the guy that did the shooting, I think his name was Ronald, I think. Nevertheless, the guy he thought was his grandfather did have that disease. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. So if he didn't have the disease, I don't think my dad had the disease. Wait, so that means that guy's not my... Because the fact is the disease is a genetics thing, so it's passed down from generation to generation. And so the fact of the matter is, obviously, no one on his mom's side of the family had it. So what it turns out to be the case is that actually his real father was the hero, the cop who actually stopped the shooting, who had died like a year prior to this episode. But it turns out that guy's son, Houston, was actually Carter's half-brother. And so what this whole murder was about is because Carter has, like, on his way, like, he could easily go to the major leagues when, like, he's a baseball star. You know, it's like, oh, he's easily got the talent to become a, big time named baseball player. But the fact of the matter is, Carter finding out the truth about his parents would mean that he would have exposed it to the world. Like, hey, this is who my dad is. Because for one, he's lived his entire life believing his dad was this monster that committed such an atrocity. And then find out, oh, your dad wasn't that guy. Like, you've lived in the shadows. You've held onto this, thinking, having to. I think the fact is, he went through the trouble of even changing his name just so he could distance himself from his father. And it's like, it was all for nothing, because that's not even your real dad. So he would have went to everyone like, yeah, that's not my dad, and find out who my real dad is. My dad is in fact the one who stopped the bad guy, because apparently the hero in this case, he was having an affair. I'm very curious to know what will happen with the wife, because obviously we met her in this episode, finding out her son's behind the murder, but also, did I bring that up before? I don't know. Like, I get so caught up in my own brain, I don't sometimes, like, it phases through me, like, I'm like, oh, what I'm saying sometimes. I don't even pay attention to what I'm saying sometimes. That's kind of sad, but nevertheless, it makes you wonder how she feel about it, knowing, like, not only did her husband have an affair? Because like I'm sure she put him on a pedestal. It's like, oh, my husband was a great hero. The fact is he didn't want to be treated like a hero. Maybe that's one of the reasons why. Maybe on some subconscious level he knew about that. Maybe he knew that Carter was actually his son, but he never really accepted him. It went on believing that his dad was that bad guy, or maybe he just didn't know. I don't know. I get the feeling like with a situation like that, you might know. Because, like, she pointed it out, the fact is that he never wanted to be kind of recognized as a hero. But then after he died, she's like, well, he's not around to complain about, so I'm going to treat him like the hero he was. So maybe it was out of guilt or something like that. But I don't know. That would be kind of interesting. But it's like, yeah, not only... But he also killed kind of like... I mean, I guess she won't feel as much connection, but still, Houston ended up killing his half-brother. Because basically, admitting that that's his half-brother would admit to having a CMT, because CMT is a genetics thing, so it came from their father's side of the family, so it would have meant he would have gotten it. It would have basically ruined his baseball career, because no one would take him in if they know, like, oh, your brother's like that. Wait a minute, that disease is genetic, so eventually, you may not have it now, you might be in perfect peak condition now, but eventually, we'd lose a lot of money, because basically you'd be useless to us later on in the road. So that's kind of messed up. Like, I mean, granted, like, obviously from a different perspective, you can understand why he did. They're not saying it's justified, but you understand why he did it, because it's like, that's a crap ton of money like a baseball player would make. So it's like, I mean, I guess it's a combination of the money plus his passion of like, oh, this is what I want to do, this is what I put all my efforts into, and that future's taken away from me. But I'm sure money was like the main motive of like, oh, I could have done this, could have had this life, but it's like, his brother jeopardized that, so for that he ended up killing his own half-brother and ended up killing the lawyer that was kind of discovering all of this, Fred, so, which sucked. Kirby, that was his last name, because it clicked in my head. I was like, you're right, because he kind of had a name that made me click and think of something nerdy, Kirby. Nevertheless, moving on. Two interesting things about this case is, for one, I thought it was kind of interesting how the coach at the last minute tried to take the fall for him, which technically the coach was associated with it because he kind of covered up some of the stuff. Obviously, he knew the details of the case and everything like that. So even the fact is of what weapon was used, it was actually messed up that Carter, as well as at the time it was Fred, because initially they thought it was Fred as well as his associate Pinky, but it turns out Pinky was actually in the hospital because he's basically been sick all week from meningitis. So they even wrote that Bell even talked about the fact that he was so delirious that he ended up calling himself Lando Calrissian. That's why they weren't able to find Pinky, so that's why they thought he was dead. But it turned out obviously it was Carter who was in there. So, but the point is, like, the fact is that Carter was kind of killed by one of like the prizes he had won. Like, he had two of them, and one of them, and they're basically like little globe things that was used to kill him. And because the fact is that Sherlock was doing his own investigating, obviously kind of recreating the crime scene in Joan's room, which she didn't appreciate. But the fact is that he was using like a bowling ball that was kind of a similar shape and size, obviously shape but size as the murder weapon, and he was trying to recreate like a stain that was on the wall, but he just couldn't quite get it because he was like, I don't know why. How would you be able to get that? Because it's like 14 some feet, like the blood stain was like 16 or 17 feet away from like the actual murder. So it's like, how did that happen? Like, even with all his force and everything, he's like, I'm slightly above average when it comes to strength. So even then, I couldn't get the blood to go that far. The furthest he can make it was like 14 feet or something like that, which I think is pretty impressive. But I guess, like he said, a little above average. So, I just love the fact that was all done in Joan's room. Is that the first time I'm sure he's done stuff in her room, but I don't think he's ever done anything to that scale before. But it turns out that obviously Houston wasn't one behind this, and like the reason why Joan was able to figure it out is because Sherlock threw like the coconut or whatever he was using it for the experiment into the trash can. It's like, that's the bang that the neighbors thought they heard. It's like, it was him throwing it away. Apparently he threw it like probably like a long way down the street. Basically he threw it like 245 feet into a dumpster. It's like, yeah, like, in all honesty, that's very impressive. Too bad you had to be a piece of crap and murder your half brother and an innocent guy that was trying to get him the truth. I mean, it sucked, like how far he was willing to go just to keep it buried. At first I was like, oh, maybe it wasn't him. I was like, maybe this is actually his mom. But then like they added baseball, and I was like, right, he'd be able to, that kind of explained like the blood splatter being further away than when it was. It's just, I think it was from the fact is, maybe I missed it, but I'm guessing it was from like him throwing it at one of them from far away, and it ended up getting the blood splatter that they ended up seeing there. So overall, a very interesting case because it's kind of the interesting thing is like the fact of the matter is Sherlock has kind of been in a bit of a slump since like Shinwell beat the crap out of him. I didn't expect him to tell Watson, which on some level it makes sense that he would tell Watson because it's like, well, Shinwell did this to me, so I want you to kind of stay away from him. It seemed like neither one of them was really met up with him subsequently since. And the fact is that Sherlock's been kind of like, you know, Joan kind of points it out. It's like, yeah, she knows that Sherlock has his own system of things where it's like, yeah, he sleeps with ladies. And she's like, I'm not trying to judge you or anything, but it's like you've had a lot of ladies kind of circulating throughout this apartment. I mean, the brownstone. So it's kind of like, you know, she's like, obviously you're just trying to like distract yourself because of this whole Shinwell situation, like, because he can't quite get his head clear because it's been bothering him. Because he's still looking at the fact that the matter is Shinwell's a criminal. It's like, maybe I shouldn't have covered up for him. Like, a lot of stuff has been put in perspective now. Like I said, I'm still not 100% certain about the whole thing. I mean, especially with the way Shinwell said it last episode. Obviously, they replayed it at the beginning of the episode. He's like, I didn't kill him. SBK did, which is like, yeah, you did kill him, but the fact of the matter is you did it under orders of SBK. But it's like, I killed one person, SBK killed like a whole bunch of people. Let me do what I'm doing. Get in my way, I'll mess you up. Anyone that gets in my way. So, because for Sherlock, it's like he put so much faith and effort into Shinwell and just to find out that he was supporting a murderer. Like, the fact of the matter is, yes, Sherlock's crossed the line sometimes, but never to that extreme. And, you know, obviously there are different circumstances because I think, like I said, I think I brought it up last time, but it's also like I said, take the situation that dealt with Alfredo as well as the one that dealt with Irene. When it came to Irene, he tortured the guy known as M, the one he thought killed Irene, obviously before finding out that she was alive and then eventually finding out she was Moriarty. But then, like, you know, take the situation with Alfredo, during the whole situation with Alfredo when that guy kidnapped him. Sherlock beat the crap out of him, which we have not seen hide nor hair of him subsequently since then. That was season 3's finale when that happened. So I'm curious, will we ever cross paths with him again? Will that kind of turn into something else or not? Maybe not. But we've seen Alfredo subsequently one time since that episode, haven't we? Because I think we ended up finding out, I think it was back in season 4 we ended up finding out that he kind of fell off the wagon and was kind of using again, So it's not like Sherlock, like I said, hasn't crossed the line, but not to that degree. But he's come close on some occasions. But I guess the difference is, like, Shinwell did it out of obligation of a gang he was in. Sherlock did it out of obligation to someone he cares about. So I guess that kind of differentiates it, kind of like a hero, kind of an anti-hero thing versus just straight up villain type of thing, if you had to put it in a different perspective. But nevertheless, because it's like, you know, it just, I guess the whole situation left a sour taste in his mouth. Because the entire episode, he's also dealing with a group known as Niobe. Basically, it's like some New York group that's like a conglomerate of like PIs and stuff. But Sherlock has like a huge problem with them. And especially when he finds out that Watson had actually included them and signed them up for it. Which Watson was like, yeah, this is back in like basically at the end of season 2 / parts of, you know, before the beginning of season 3, the time he went back to London. So it's like, the fact is that, you know, putting it out there, it's like, I think it was when he originally, well, I think it was when he came back, she kind of added him to the list because it was like, you know, continue the whole detective agency thing. And it's like, this basically conglomerate would make it a lot easier to track down different PIs. It's almost like a yellow book listing for PIs and stuff like that. Well, Sherlock looks at it as like a sham because the fact of the matter is there's so many people that are a part of it that aren't real true detectives. They're essentially half-assing it, if not even half-assing it, doing it even less. So, you know, as a detective and, you know, as he takes pride in his work and he looking at that a group like this exists, it tarnishes the reputation of other PIs. So he was trying to destroy the group. I love the fact is they were looking for files, and then like Sherlock's, I finally found it. He's like, and she's like, and he's like, oh yeah, I found the file we were looking for 10 minutes ago. I just had to make sure I found this file that helped me destroy Niobe. And you just had the look on Joan's face like, Sherlock. Even at one point, she's like, are you sure that this whole situation isn't just you kind of venting because of the whole Shinwell situation? Because there are the parallels of the fact is that someone who's quote unquote taking the teachings of a detective and tarnishing it. Shinwell kind of tarnished it, you know, in Sherlock's mind the same way these people are. So it's like, if you can't directly deal with the Shinwell situation because he can't really take Shinwell down like he wants to because Shinwell's already there in the SBK organization. So it's like, why not let him stay there to kind of get rid of it? But it's kind of tarnished the relationship that they were building a rapport, but that's kind of all down the drain now. Like I said, I'm very interested to see where that goes from here. It's like after that, like Will he even bother asking them for help? Will Sherlock be willing to help? Obviously, Joan is still on the fence of it. Like I said, like things are making it seem like it was straight up him, but he said it was SBK. Like I said, you could interpret that two different ways. And obviously, Joan has her problems with it, obviously, because he beat the crap out of Sherlock, and that sucks. But at the same time, it's like I don't know if Shinwell's actually a murderer, and I mean, it's still up in the air, like on that situation. Like I don't know. I'm leaning more towards what Sherlock says, but there is a part of me that wants to believe he isn't a murderer, that it's not clear cut that he's a killer, and I'm thinking it is going to lean that way. But for now, my mind is more leaning towards Sherlock. But I do accept the possibility that it's most likely going to be the situation where Joan is right. But nevertheless, he ends up destroying the group to a certain degree. Because he had ended up talking to the head of the group. His name is Lewis, and Lewis is like, yeah, the fact of the matter is, like, there are a lot of sloppy people in this organization, and I'm trying to make it better. Just give me the time needed to make it better, which Sherlock kind of doesn't, but kind of does, because basically he rebrands it as Aesopy, or Aesop, I think is how you say it. Nevertheless, rebranding it so that it's like a lot more like a lot of people who've already paid to be a part of the group and everything. Your money's locked in, your membership is locked in, and if you want to stay, then you're going to have to like abide by his rules. The fact is that because before, to get to be a part of Niobe wasn't that hard. You basically had to pay like an entry fee, like you had to pay a certain like fee for being a part of the group, like $200 some, and you'd have a badge basically saying like, oh, you're a PI. It's like that's all it was. Even though Sherlock himself admitted that obviously being a PI and stuff like that, there was like, you know, slim pickings when it came to the tests and stuff, so like it'd be pretty easy to pass, but at least that was some standard. Now this kind of removes any standard at all and just makes it that any Joe Blow can become one. So but now that he's kind of reinvented it, like Lewis stays in the same position, all the members get to stay, but now it's like a much more legit group because it's like, oh, you'll follow my teachings, that basically you have to follow these certain guidelines and see a certain way. More professionalize it, that if you're going to be private eyes or private detectives, you're going to have to follow my standard, like, oh, this is the proper way of investigating. So if you don't live up to these standards, you're kind of screwed over. So, and there's no just like leaving. It's like, no, you're going to stay in this program until you get it right and become the detective. I will whip you into shape. Even saying like there's a test that he created that is like everyone's got to pass to. He even hands it to Watson. He's like, oh, make me proud, Watson, that you do good on it. So even like the first question, he's like, really, this is the first question? So I don't know, I really appreciate that. So I guess he was able to take that anger and stuff and kind of make a silver lining to it. So, but once again, the question is like, how would things fare between him and Shinwell, as well as Joan and Shinwell going forward? I'm very curious to see. But overall, a very good episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.